I think social media content actually needs to be much more personal. It needs to be focused on the person that's on the other side of the screen. And when you talk directly to them, instead of just clipping out a 90-second clip from the weekend sermon, it would be really beneficial for a church.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Church Circle podcast. I'm excited, as I probably have been across the whole season so far, because we've got a very special guest on today. You may have seen him before on Instagram, on TikTok. He's kind of a bit of a viral sensation in the Christian world at this point. And I've actually known him for, he's laughing, but it's true. I've actually known him for a few years just on Instagram, but this is the first time we've actually spoken together. And I'm really excited to have Zach Windahl from Orlando, Florida with us. Zach, how are you?
Oh, so good. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on here. And I'm so happy that we were able to finally connect because, as you said, we've been going back and forth, even just in DMs for years at this point. And so very, very happy that we're able to chat.
Yeah, really exciting. And you may have seen Zach's content before. He does short devotionals on TikTok. And you've got the catchphrase of "it couldn't hurt." And so you would have seen his content for sure, but you also run something called the Brand Sunday, right?
We started it and I did, and we actually were acquired about a year and a half ago, but still very involved there.
So you may have seen their products as well before. And you're also an author as well. So you've got a lot of things going on at the moment. And so thank you for taking the time to join us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about outreach today. Now, as you have known, I've said it lots of times before in this podcast so far in this season, that we're looking to kind of broaden our horizons on this podcast, talk more about generic church stuff, whether it's vision and giving, youth ministry, online communications, just a wider range than just creativity. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was outreach. And who better than Zach Windahl to talk about outreach today? As I said, you would have seen his stuff on Instagram or TikTok before. So Zach, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe you could just share a little bit about, for those who don't know, or maybe just want to know a little bit more about you, what your story is and what's got you up to this point now.
Absolutely. So author, entrepreneur, social media, you hit kind of all of the main big things about me, but live in Orlando, Florida right now with my wife and our dog. I wasn't always here. I was actually raised in Minneapolis, up in Minnesota in the cold, had to get out of there, had to move down to Florida, but was raised in the church, had an amazing set of parents. And my mom was actually a 4-time cancer survivor. So I grew up seeing God move in miraculous ways with her every single year from actually the age of 4 to 15. But even though I grew up in church, and even though I grew up seeing God move in such amazing ways, I still fell away from my faith for quite a few years, especially through college and then shortly after college. And it was never really an issue with God. It was never really an issue with the church even. It was an issue more so with just a lot of Christians that I knew and was surrounded by. And I didn't feel like they were living out the lifestyle of a Christian. And I didn't want to be associated with them. And I don't know if that's the best way of looking at your faith, but that's the reality of where I was when I was 24 years old. And so I hit a really low spot where everything in my life was falling apart. And I was like, God, I'm going to go all in for 2 years. I want prove that you're real. Show me that I should be chasing after this. And I just wanted to learn the Bible. And so I did. You remember that workout program that was P90X? Where it was
I don't, because I'm not very athletic, but I'm sure people will be able to relate.
Yeah. So there was a workout program called P90X. And I remember, I think it was Elevation Church. They did something called B90X, where you read through the entire Bible in 90 days. And I was like, oh, this is a perfect starting point for me. So I did it. And I was kind of shocked because I learned so much that I hadn't known before, even though I thought I knew the Bible because I grew up in church. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go all in, and I'm just gonna study the Bible as deep as I can. So I moved out to Australia to join this program out there where we would study for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was like the most insane program ever. And by the end of it, you would have read through the entire Bible 5 times and developed your own sort of commentary around it. And so I really fell in love with the word at that point. And I realized that there's so many other Christians out there that grew up going to church, but don't necessarily know the Bible. And so as an entrepreneur, I really have spent the last 7 years figuring out how to make the Bible less overwhelming for people through my different products. So everything that I create was things that I wish that I had when I was first starting out.
That's incredible. And I've done the shout out to Theos U. I've done the 30-day shred in January, 2 years in a row. And that's intense. So I can't even imagine doing that 5 times over. That's the Bible in 30 days, by the way. If you haven't done it, it's definitely worth doing to get a high level picture of the Bible and an understanding for it without diving into it. But then to dive into it 5 times in a row and then to come up with your own commentary. Yeah, that's one of those I'm sure it's one of those make or break moments where you decide whether you really love or don't like the Bible. And I'm glad a lot of people really love it. But that's great, man. And I think you're in a really interesting position where we see a lot of pastors who study the Bible, right? Like a lot of people who are in a ministry role, and and I think sometimes that role can be, especially in like day to day when you're engaged with people, as immediately as you say, I'm a pastor, it kind of like people get their defenses up or they've got this kind of stigma about it and they're not sure. Whereas you're kind of not really like that. You're an entrepreneur who has a gifting in sharing the gospel. So how does, and when I kind of read more about you before we did this podcast, you talked about selling shark teeth as like one of your first entrepreneurial ventures. So how does like going from selling shark teeth to selling these faith-based products, how does that impact you personally in terms of how you share the gospel?
For sure. I think just as an entrepreneur, so ever since I was a kid, literally like I was 9 years old, I was creating shark tooth necklaces and walking up and down the beach in Florida and just selling them for people, $10 a pop. And as like a 9-year-old, just crushing it.
Nice.
And that kind of like just that mentality over the years always stuck with me, whether it was through clothing lines or recording studio. And then now obviously with doing Bible-based products. But as an entrepreneur, the way that my mind works is, okay, we find a problem or we find something that we wish we had, and then we create a solution around that. Yeah. And so as now falling in love with the Bible, and I was looking at all of these other Christians that really didn't know the word necessarily, but needed something to have their hand held to make it less overwhelming for them. I was like, okay, that's my problem. Let's figure out a solution for them. What do I wish I had? What would work really well for me? And I feel like I play a really good job at like poking holes in things personally. So I'm like, nah, that wouldn't work because of this, or I wouldn't like that because of this. And so I'm really just creating things that I wish I had when I was first starting out. And it just so happens to be that a lot of other people also really like them. So the first product that I made was called the Bible Study. And it basically holds your hand as you read through the entire Bible over the course of a year. And as an entrepreneur that was not an author, I only understood a little bit of business. I'm figuring it all out for the first time as well. It wasn't ever a thing where I was like, you know what, I want to write a book, or I've always dreamed of being an author. That wasn't the case at all. And so when I was first writing the Bible study, it was like, man, I had all of these notes on every book of the Bible. How can I make them simplified so that somebody else can really fall in love with studying scripture? And so it was like, okay, let's, once I had it written, then I have a little bit of a design background. So I was like, okay, let's design this thing. Let's teach myself InDesign. Let's teach myself like how to lay out a book. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know manufacturing for books. I didn't know any of that. But as I started stepping out there and putting one foot in front of the next, God began to open up doors, and people just started like giving me money. Like, here's $2,000, make a website. Here's $500, make some promotional copies. And we hit a spot where it was like, okay, I'm going to create a Kickstarter campaign now. And we ended up doing that in 2017. And we ran a successful campaign, and we were able to actually go to print with the books. And it turned into, we were literally the number 4 fastest growing consumer product in all of America,
Wow.
which is like mind blowing when you think of a Bible study
Yeah.
doing that. But it was finding a problem and then providing a solution to it that I wish I would have had when I first started out.
I think that's the beauty of the gospel as well, right? Is that and
Yeah.
just the message of Christ and the Bible in general is that it is complex, and it is complex to a point. If you want to dive into it and get to understand it, it is complex, and you can study it forever. But it's simple enough that you can say it in a few sentences and someone can understand it. And that is very rare that you get that something that's as easy to understand simply, and then you can spend a whole lifetime studying it. And I think that's so cool. And then the fact that you saw that as an opportunity to say, actually, I need to get this into people's hands for it to be easy to understand, for them to start their journey. So it's not this big, complex, scary thing. It's like, actually, this is a really simple thing. Let me start with that. And then we walk people on the journey with that. So that's really cool.
100%.
In today's age, because we kind of, I feel like 200, 300 years ago, when someone said they were a Christian, that was the norm. And so it wasn't difficult for us as Christians or individuals to share the gospel or to talk to people about it, because it wasn't something that was frowned upon or something that was unusual. But in today's modern age, and I think this is something that we're going to be learning more and more about as the years go by and Christians become more kind of under the spotlight for their beliefs, how do we kind of, because we talked about earlier about you kind of online and your devotionals and stuff, you're very out there as a Christian and very very honest and very you can only have to scroll through your page for 2 seconds to know that you love Jesus. How do we as the church and we as individuals, how do we approach sharing the gospel in today's digital age? Is there a need to rethink our approach, or is it just something that we need to just keep doing the same as we're doing now?
There's many ways that we could go about that. I think the way that I see pastors and churches creating content right now, I think there can be definitely a huge shift in that content. I think right now it's super common to have a pastor just post clips of their sermon and then that's it. And maybe like a photo of them on stage with everybody smiling at them. And it's like, it comes across as kind of cringy. And I think social media content actually needs to be much more personal. And so as a creator myself, it's not about like showing off and showing all of the good things that I'm doing. I think if you're just posting for your friends in high school and your college friends, that's one thing. But as a creator, as a church that's now creating content, it needs to be focused on the person that's on the other side of the screen. And when you talk directly to them, instead of just clipping out like a 90-second clip from the weekend sermon, I think it would be a drastic shift in the amount of eyes that are on the content. I think if you had the pastor sitting in their office and actually talking to the person on the other side of the screen, they can be talking about their message for sure. But if it's in that setting and it's directed at the listener, it'll perform much better. I was thinking about this earlier. Something that seems so basic that I think a lot of churches can do is just put your location, like city and state, in your bio. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'll get hit with a random reel and I'll click on it and I have no idea where the church is and I can't even seem to find it. Like, I don't know where St. John's is. I don't know where Eden Prairie is. Like, tell me what state it's in, because for me, like, I reach 10 to 12 million accounts every single month. And if I was a church and I didn't have my location in my bio, I would be missing out on so much impact. Then it would be like, oh, this church is right down the street. I had no idea. And so I think if you make those two shifts, it would be really beneficial for a church.
Spreading your church's message can feel overwhelming when you're short on time and the right words escape you. That's where Church Media Squad's Social Media Squad comes in. They'll take your vision and craft scroll-stopping content that reaches your community with the gospel. From writing engaging captions to handling all of your posting, they act as your dedicated social media team so you can focus on ministry. Ready to save time and reach more people for Christ? Learn more at churchmediasquad.com. That's great. And I love how practical you just got with that advice as well, because sometimes it is those little changes and those little strategies that really make the big difference. And I'd never thought about that before. When someone goes into your profile, maybe they do want to know where you're from so they can see if they can attend that church as well. So great tips, great thoughts. And we can kind of dive more into it. You mentioned some of your metrics there. You've reached hundreds of thousands of followers. You have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, both on Instagram and TikTok. And so what strategy have you found most effective in not just reaching people, but also connecting with them? And I think this kind of goes hand in hand with our previous question, because the church not only wants to reach people, but also connect with them. So what strategies kind of take them to that next level?
Yeah, I think understanding who the person is on the other side of the screen and figuring out what their issues are, what they're dealing with, and then actually making content around actually helping them with them in mind. I think being able to, like, all content is based in three areas. It's entertainment, educational, or inspirational. So choosing one of those and kind of sticking in your lane. For me, it's typically educational or inspirational. And by having a clear focus on what you're actually creating content around, it can really help the person on the other side of the screen. And so when it comes to figuring out how to connect with them even more, I think DMs are huge. Like Instagram, the biggest feature of Instagram, more so than posts or anything else, is actually is the use of DMs. And so connecting with people that way, and then also just setting up figuring out a funnel that's actually going to connect them on the back end in different ways that you can follow up with them in the future and continue your connection with them. For me, it ends up being that I work on other products. So as I'm creating a bunch of free content, eventually I promote a product, and that's a way of connecting with them in the future. So it's kind of like a open door. It's the first step with people, and then finding ways to follow through with it.
Yeah, I think we, as the church, we've kind of underestimated when we hire a communications director or a communications lead, or even just a social media manager, quite often we forget that the DMs are such an active part of that strategy. And it's just like, we need you to create this and post it. And actually, there's so much follow up, and so much of the gap between being visible on social media and them coming to church or responding to an event or whatever it is that communication that gets missed. And so there is so much importance in just being active in the DMs. Even like on my Instagram, I have that my DMs are open so people can message me and I can respond. And just having that, like it being approachable, I think makes a massive difference in just how you can communicate with people. And it just shows there's a person there as well. And I think quite often we, as churches, we focus on building the brand, the logo, the website, how it looks on social, but rarely do we actually focus on the people and how the people come across. Even like things down to as simple as Google Business, the pictures that we put on there quite often of empty buildings or empty parking lots, and that reflects nothing to do with the people that are inside the church. And so we have to think about, okay, when people look at these photos, when people message us, who are they interacting with? Do they get a sense there's actually someone that cares and there's people there that have community and are enjoying life? Is that transferable? Is that recognizable? And if that's not, then that's probably a good red flag for you to attend to on your social or in your online for your church.
Yes.
For you, Zach, what's been some of the biggest learning curves you've had in communicating with short form content? Because it's one thing, like us having a conversation right now, you can set up more context, we can deep dive into topics, we can have a laugh, but in 30 seconds or a minute, it's really hard to get a message across clearly and have some action or something at the end. So how do you do it? How do you make such good inspirational, educational short format content?
I think you need to understand the platform that you're posting on for sure, and what people are hoping to get out of it. And so for what works right now on social media, I heard the CEO of Instagram just say this a few weeks ago. Like, the thing that they push the most is shareable content. And so what is shareable? Well, things that are relatable, something that somebody is going to want to post on their story or send to a friend. And so I create a lot of content that makes people want to share it with others, or to be able to post it on their story and be like, hey, this I relate with and this represents me. And so in 60 seconds, you're never going to be able to go super deep with somebody. You aren't going to be able to even teach them something really deep. And so that's what the back end is for. That's what going to church is for, or my products are for. And so my focus is always on spreading my net as wide as I can, and by giving them like really basic stuff. And then when the product actually does come out, then I'm going to shout it from the rooftops, because I believe that it's going to actually take them to the next level in their faith. So yeah, I may miss out on saying a lot of things on a topic, but like, if you think about it, okay, if Michelle is laying on her couch after a really long day at work, she's exhausted from the gym, she doesn't want to be taught what propitiation is,
Yeah.
like she wants to be like either entertained or educated in a basic way or inspired in some way. And sure, there's definitely some people on social media that do go deep and they have a lot of success with it, but that's just not the approach that I've had. And which, like, I could definitely criticize myself, and I do get criticized too, but that is what works for me. And so like, I'll post these devotionals a few times a week where they're just like these basic things inspired by a Bible verse, as if it's Jesus speaking to you. And I think that just opens the door to get somebody in, so that when I do actually teach, even if I'm only like quote unquote teaching a few times a week on my social media, then like they might not have had that in from following somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's like, open the door, get them in, and then really like begin to take the next step with them, so that when I do start sharing about a product that's going to help them walk through the Bible, like, oh, it's amazing. Now, like, he brought me to this spot, and now he has a way of helping me read through the Bible. Of course, I'm going to want to do that, because it's going to take me to the next step in my faith. And so it's really just walking with them and not being afraid of being too basic, and then also not hoping to go too deep right away, because that comes later.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing with a kind of split strategy, is that you don't have to move all of your eggs into the short format content basket, right? Like with churches, the Sunday sermon is going to be the same every week in terms of its length, or in terms of its how in depth it goes. But then you've got this hour or 35 minutes to an hour's worth of content here. What can you do with that? Well, you could, like you said, you can break it up into smaller pieces of content. You can then have the pastor like being a bit more kind of authentic and sitting down in front of the camera talking about it. You can break that big piece of content up into smaller pieces. It doesn't dilute the big message, but what it does is it creates more opportunities for it to get recommended in the feed to point people towards that thing. And I think with a podcast like what we're talking about right now, or with sermons, it's very much I'm going to actively seek out this content. So you go onto YouTube, you go onto Spotify, you find it, you play it, you listen to it while you're doing something, or you're watching it as an active participant. The thing with social is it's a little different game, because we're dealing with recommended all the time. Everything's recommended unless you follow. And you don't necessarily go onto Instagram to find the thing that someone's, it's not like a daily activity to go and find what someone's posted. It's more I'm going to be on the timeline, I'm going to be scrolling, and someone's going to recommend something.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, shareable is really important. Also, just in terms of short format content is what Instagram likes to recommend at the moment. So having that appear in the timeline, and that's where you're going to start to reach people on social that you've never reached before. If you can get it in that algorithm, if you can get people to share it, it's going to go way further than just your follower base. And then that will point them to that larger strategy that we're talking about, whether that is getting them through the doors, whether that's wanting to have a conversation with them, whether that's getting them booked in for an event, or getting them into the church on a Sunday. So yeah, it's great points. And I'm really glad we're having this conversation, because I think sometimes as church communicators or church leaders, we go, oh, well, maybe our church isn't about short format content. Well, that's okay, but maybe that can be part of the strategy. Like if you're a church that goes deep into the Bible, then why not just start by introducing some themes in the 30 seconds to a minute, and then have a follow-on place to find that content, because you never know who you're going to reach. You might as well just kind of go wide and see how much you can reach, and then narrow that down from there. The funnel you were talking about. So these are 100%. Really great points.
And I think like one of the coolest things is when you realize that, oh man, you can actually build a community online as well. Then it's not all about necessarily walking through the door. I was a part of a church down in Miami, and I led a small group there with my wife, and we did our small group online, and we had people from literally all over the world. I think we represented like 7 different countries in our small group, and it was everybody saying that they were part of the same church and the same group, but nobody was there in person. And 100%, I think being in person is necessary and an incredible thing. But if you can open the door to people from all over the world just through social media and just through your online presence, like that's amazing, because that's like you're spreading your message in ways that other people aren't. And
Yeah.
so huge fan of that.
And I think as well is, even if someone's strategy as a church isn't to reach the nations, as in
Yeah.
if they feel very passionate about reaching locally, then you never
Yeah.
know what reaching wide will have an impact on locally, if that makes sense. So, for example, a very personal example for us is that my church here in Norwich that we moved up to be a part of because we felt God was calling us. I had no clue they existed until I found them on Instagram. I followed them for 4 years. I was up to date with what was going on in their church. And then we came to visit after 4 years of seeing them on Instagram. And we decided at that point, this is where God wants us to be, and we're going to move here. And so we moved up there. But what I'm saying is that if they had just focused on local, then maybe they wouldn't have those people come to the church. And then, if the end goal is to get people through the doors, then sometimes having that large reach will still do that, even if it doesn't feel like that's the direct strategy to do that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. 100%. Couldn't agree more.
So for you, in kind of your opinion, especially because you're having to balance this, there's trends, there's a certain way culture's going right now, and we have to get out there with the gospel. We're called to reach the nations and to share the message of Jesus Christ. How do we do that and stay strong and true to the message?
Yeah.
But while staying culturally relevant? Is it possible to do both of those things?
100%, I think it is. I think there's so many examples in scripture where Paul is talking about local things that are happening at the time, and it works for him, obviously. And I think we need to be doing the same thing. An issue that I think a lot of the churches run into is that we try to be cool too late. So we'll do something that was like really cool a year ago. And then when you do it, it's like, wait, why in the world did you just do that? Like the younger generation and what's cool culturally moves so fast. Like literally what worked last week isn't going to work today.
Yeah.
And so I was just telling somebody just recently, like how incredible it would be if anybody listening to this wants to do it, or if you want to do it, I think you should. But to create like a weekly newsletter of relevant trends and social media ideas that can be replicated by different churches, and just sell that to churches for like $7 a month or something, I think it would do so well, because a lot of churches don't necessarily know what is relevant or what's cool, what's going to perform well. Maybe it's because it's like, well, the person that's controlling the feed isn't necessarily on top of it. And if you do have somebody that's on top of it, amazing. Then like actually make the content and make it relevant. Also, I think it can be a bad thing because we've gotten so focused on being relevant and so focused on preaching to just a few people who are there for the first time that we want to like sound cool to them, that it's actually doing a disservice to the rest of the congregation, because it's creating a lot of people that don't necessarily know the Bible. Sure, they may leave encouraged every week after watching like more of a TED Talk format, but they don't know the Bible and the gospel message. So as you said, it's definitely a balance between like focusing on being relevant, being cool, but then like, man, the church is for going deeper and experiencing the presence of God and growing as a community. And if we miss out on that because we're trying to be cool, I think it's going to be a major issue for where the church goes in the future.
It's the balance, isn't it? You have a church is a family of all ages, as is the body. The body of Christ is a family of all ages, and so everyone has a unique stake in moving the church forward. And I think the elder generation, and I say old, like when I say older generation, I'm not talking about 60, 70. I'm talking about basically the divide between Gen Z and millennials, or Gen Z and is it Gen X? Is that the one that comes after millennials? Yeah, and so. When we talk about that kind of divide, I think there's something really important about having both on the team, right? I think that I've seen such great success when a Gen X pastor or even a boomer pastor, they say, I'm going to get a Gen Z or a younger millennial to come into this and speak into this situation because I need to see what's relevant right now. Now that doesn't change anything to do with the message, but the method of how we share it does change. And I've seen like the most random Instagram accounts of like military accounts or like historic places. They find a trend,
Yeah.
they jump on it, and suddenly it's reaching random people that would never have followed them in their like.
Totally.
I saw one that was like this meme of it was the most random thing. It was literally a giant cat that was like
Yeah.
dancing, and they put it on
Yeah.
top of like a Honda like car dealership, and it
Yeah.
was like, my boss doesn't understand this meme, and it got like 500,000, like to like 1 million views. Got shared like crazy. The
Amazing.
most marketing that little Honda dealership will ever get, and it was this
Yeah.
cat meme on a Instagram reel. And it's like sometimes the method doesn't make sense to us in our
Yeah.
age, but there is
Yeah.
a group of people that it will make sense to, and they will connect and engage with it. And if we can just leverage the people in our church that are of a younger age, even our Gen A's coming through, who understand meme culture and understand modern culture, if we could just get their thoughts on certain things. Now, it doesn't mean that everything they say is going to be a good idea. And that's why you use the wisdom of the older generation to balance and offset that. But if you can find that happy harmony where you've got the wisdom, the knowledge, and the experience of those older congregants, and then the creativity, the innovation, like for you as well, the entrepreneurship of that younger generation, and you can fuse that together, the church will only be stronger for it. So it's really exciting times. And I keep seeing that happening in church as well, where they get a young person into the room and their sermon planning or their events planning just goes to another level because they've just introduced some fresh creativity. And it's an exciting time. Kind of speaking about the Gen Z, the Gen A, I think one of the most important things for that age group right now is authenticity. And I think that's something you do really well on your socials is, like you said, it's not on a stage with that pastor example. They're not on a stage. It's not a clip from a sermon. It's like them being real with the camera, and it's authentic. What does that play into outreach moving forward for us, especially on social media? Like, are people going to even pay attention if it's some really well finessed example of a video, or is it just really about just setting up an iPhone and maybe an LED light and just sharing?
Yeah, for sure. I think the younger generation can sniff out fake like nobody's business. And so we have to be real with it. And I think what worked really well a few years ago was something that's like so polished. Everything's perfect. The lights are perfect. The camera's perfect. Like everything is dialed in. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think as we've seen just with the TikTok generation, is that like people want real. It doesn't have to be perfect. And they just want like what's actually happening in your life. And so with the church and with pastors posting, like life isn't always good. That's the reality. And so what if we like learned to show the highs and the lows as a way of like teaching people like, okay, all of this bad stuff is happening right now, or all this great stuff is happening. But how do we approach it from a biblical mindset? I think if we learn to like teach people how to view things from the lens of God, it's going to have a far greater impact than just saying like, I think for us, it can be like, oh, this happened, but like God is good. Or we'll just have like, we'll be stuck in these Christianese responses that I think worked back in the day, but they don't anymore with the younger generation. So we need to explain why things are different now and be real with them and be like, hey, this is like a major bummer for us, but this is what can come from it.
Yeah.
And this is when we post about it again in 6 months, we're going to be able to show you the miracle that actually took place, and we'll show you how God's hand was in it this whole time. And I think that would boost somebody's faith much more than like, hey, we're perfect Christians, and if you want to be perfect too, just become a Christian. Just say this prayer. And I think like if we learn to make that shift and with the younger generation, they're going to be like, oh, wow, I can relate with that person so much more. And it's going to help them grow in their faith.
The two things I've found that work really well on social right now is either authentic content or creative content. And I kind
Sure.
of see them at two ends of the spectrum, even though they're not, because you can have creative, authentic. But in terms of this example, I kind of see authentic being on one end and creative being on the other end. You can still have something very highly polished on social media, but it has to be creative. And I see this all the time in the filmmaking on Instagram has taken off in like the last 2 years. You get these really like well created, like even like someone takes a trip to Hong Kong and they do like 10 slides of these really cool still cinematic shots, right? And those things work really well. They're highly polished, but they're creative. I think where the church makes them or misses the mark is when they go for commercial, like kind of commercial looking stuff. And it's kind of almost in the middle. So you have the authentic, which is the true, honest version. You have the creative, which is the highly polished version that's taken a lot of thought and effort. And then you have the commercialized, the middle bit. And that's what you're talking about with the lights and the good camera. And it's like, it's good. And 15 years ago, it would have been like, wow, this is really high quality. But we've moved on from there because anyone can get a DSLR, anyone can get some LED lights, and they can make something that looks like a commercial. But that, I think we've become so numb to that now as a generation. We're like, either give me something creative or give me something authentic, or I'm going to scroll straight past that, because we've almost got our own ad block kind of built into our brains, where we see something that looks remotely like an ad, where it's that middle ground. We just go next and keep scrolling. And I feel like we're in that kind of, so I would say to anyone who's creating content, any church, like, don't be afraid to go super creative and professional. Yeah. But if you're going to do it, go there. Don't try and meet in the middle and try and appeal to a lot of different audiences. If you're going to do something very artistic, go for it. And I see lots of churches do that. I think of VU Church. I think of Mosaic Church. Super artistic, super professional, and create really cool stuff. But they're not in that awkward middle ground where it doesn't capture the attention of the viewer. So and this kind of leads me to our next question. In terms of emerging trends and technologies, what's kind of your thoughts on what the future of church and how they reach people online is going to be like? What do you think? Are there any things you're seeing on the horizon?
100%. I think right now, if churches learned mini chat really well, it's a program called Mini Chat. If a church hired somebody to help them build out a complex funnel and had somebody that was like always focused on their mini chat, it would be an absolute game changer for them. So what Mini Chat is, it's a program where you either comment on a post or reply to a story with a specific trigger word. And then by doing so, you can build out an entire conversation that's automated in the DMs. And so it could capture a name, it can capture their email address, and then it can provide them with something. So for me, I'll do it with a book where it'll be like, hey, comment the word faith below this post and I'll send you a free devotional. So then once they comment faith, then in the DMs, it'll say, hey, are you interested in getting the free devotional? They'll click yes. Then it'll say, is your name such and such? Yes. Type in your email. So then when they type in their email, then I have another trigger in my email strategy that will send them everything. And then it'll also give them an option to go purchase a copy of the devotional. And so I think if churches did that, where it was like, under each one of their sermon clips, they could post like, comment the word sermon and we'll send it to you. And then they comment the word sermon, you get their name, you get their email, and then your email campaign triggers a link to the sermon. Now you have their information captured, and you could send out every single week the sermon message, and it'll be that second step, like we were talking about, in the relationship with the audience. And I think if you learn to do that and did it for almost every 2 or 3 posts, it would be hit out of the park.
And ManyChat's not difficult to get set up either. I think getting a ManyChat kind of funnel set up would maybe take a couple of hours for most people once they kind of learned it. So it's definitely worth doing. And again, you can either have it where you say comment sermon on all of your posts and it sends the latest one, or you can have it unique to each post. So it could be like comment faith for this exact sermon and it will send that. So you can tweak the strategy depending on how much involvement you want to have. But ManyChat is a great way to start just breaking down that barrier between follower or person on social media and the church. And you get one step closer to, now this is a contact and I can reach them not just to get them to church, but also to just say, hey, we have a team that pray. Are there any prayer requests for you? Or, hey, we have an online, like you said, Zach, we have an online Bible study. Would you be interested in joining? And starting to build that thing. And you may get no response, but at least that seed has been planted, and you'll never know the impact that just those small little steps in social can have into the wider church outreach strategy. So, man, these have been some great thoughts, and I really appreciate you joining us. We're nearly at time, but I just wondered if you had a hot take or a thought around outreach for churches.
I think there needs to be a focus more on local outreach than there is on going around the world. I think that like missions work is amazing and it's super important for sure. But if the people in your community don't know that you're a Christian by the way that you live your life and love them, then something needs to change. I think every city in the world has a lot of needs. So wherever your church is located, like we need to be jumping on filling those needs. And then from there, the overflow should be on sending people out and helping them in other parts of the world. But like, if we can learn to focus locally, I think it would do a great service to the world.
There you go. The church is the hope of the world. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us, and even giving us that little reset at the end there as well. To just, I think, especially when you think about all of this social stuff, we think so big, and a lot of this conversation has actually been about how do we narrow that down and focus local. So it's something that works hand in hand, and I'm really glad that although you have all these hundreds of thousands of followers, your heart is still connected to the local church, and that's always a good sign of a person who loves Jesus. So thank you so much again, Zach, for joining us. I hope the listener has enjoyed this conversation. If they wanted to connect with you, Zach, or kind of find out more about what you offer, products, or just your devotionals and stuff, how can they get connected with you?
Yeah, on Instagram, on TikTok, at Zach Windahl, and then ZachWindahl.com. All my books are available also on thebrandsunday.com, as well as Amazon.
Zach, thank you so much again for joining us. You guys have been listening to the Church Circle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or leave us a like and a comment on YouTube. It helps us reach more people. We'll be back again next week with another episode of the Church Circle podcast. Thank you.